Okay, thank you. There are still some people who would like to ask questions, so I'm going just on and ask now Vincent Merck, who was also making a sign for a question. Vincent, you are unmuted. No, not yet. Now.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I think we muted each other.
Yeah.
Nice to see you, Helen. I think that last time was in face-to-face in Shanghai in totally different circumstances. You may remember.
Yes, exactly.
Real face-to-face. Thank you for being here. My question goes back to one of the critical incidents you were mentioning in this encounter between the American and the Chinese, in which the Americans didn't open the gifts that were given by the Chinese, which the Americans were expected to do that, they didn't. Hence an awkward situation. What I would say usually in this, to avoid this kind of politeness incidents, is to make culture explicit. Like the Americans would say, look, we know that you don't do that, so now we will not open the gifts in public because in respect to you. Are there any other strategies apart from making culture explicit? Would you recommend other options, possibly to avoid this kind of awkward situation, or apart from making it explicit?
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, what that assumes is that in advance you can guess that these issues are going to come up. Clearly somebody in Beijing thought gifts, opening of gifts. In fact, the opening of it was not an issue particularly. I mean, they commented on it. What was much more of an issue for was the type of gifts that were given and how much emphasis was given to the gifts. So I find one of the dangers of giving specific advice is that, again, it may not actually really address the particular things. Some of the things, though, I mean, I think there are general principles, and we even, so for instance, in meetings, or even in a thing like this, turn taking is always problematic. And so, you know, whether you're face to face or whether you're, you know, in a virtual one, it's always going to be easier for some people to talk than others, and easy for some people to feel left out. And I think that is something that's good, you know, we have to pay attention to. I'm hesitating because our, you know, kind of Western way is to say, let's talk about it.
Yeah, explicitly, yeah.
But, you know, for people who don't want to talk about it, it's quite embarrassing to say, you know, to admit, I find it difficult to ask my question. So, but and this is where I think I would say you need a lot of observation, you know, to be very observant when you're with a group. Am I giving everybody a chance to contribute? What are going to be the best ways of doing that? I see John Twitchen is on the call here, and I think, you know, many years ago with the video that he helped develop with Australia, where you've got those different ways of handling turn taking in meetings, is fabulous, you know, and that's a really good way of, say, raising awareness. So I think there are, you know, certain things that without saying, you know, okay, how are you going to do this, or how, you know, because often, especially with new groups, you don't know what the issues are. To be sensitive, but then find ways when you see an issue, find culturally sensitive ways of trying to address them.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Nancy Reno, Schaphausen. You can talk
Schaffhausen.
Yeah. Okay.
We're in Germany on the Lower Rhine area. Hello, Helen. I thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I just had a question, and it sort of goes back to, I can't remember what her name was, but she said what triggers the evaluation, and brought up the question of racism, which brings up a question that, or a topic that I have been trying to bring into my trainings, which is unconscious bias. And it was sort of related to what the first Vincent was also talking about. How do you pull that topic into your lessons, or into helping the participants with their perspectives? Because if it's really unconscious, it's difficult to realize what it is you're actually perceiving.
I mean, yeah, this is a difficult one. I would say, I have a colleague who, Perry Hinton, who has done a lot of, he's a psychologist, but does a lot in the cultural area. And he feels that actually this notion, this may be a bit shocking to you, this notion of unconscious bias is an unhelpful way of looking at it. So
Okay.
if you go online and sort of, so, okay, take a test, see how unconsciously biased are you? And you take the test and you think, oh my goodness, now I'm dreadful, as though you can take unconscious bias out of your head. Now I know I'm unconsciously biased. I'm going to have an operation and take it out, and then I can do something about it. So where does that, when we say unconscious bias, basically what it means is actually we've been culturally socialized, you might say, to think and so on in a certain way.
Exactly.
And just by telling people you're biased, isn't going to help, actually. It needs a much more deep, a deeper, long-standing, starting with the educational system.
Exactly, and that's one of the things I was thinking of. I've been more than telling people they have this. I've been trying to just make them aware that it's there. And what has been missing for me is the next step. And I kind of liked your idea with the 3 R's. I'm not sure if that's actually going to do it as far as making that bridge, but it sounds more positive, like there is an actual way of moving forward.
Yeah, and I think the problem, if you can put it like that, the limitation, should I say, of the 3R is that it sort of works without that emotional overtone of the kind of them and us mentality. I don't have any easy answers as to how one overcomes that, but that's where, as I say, we've kind of added in that because of our membership of different groups, we do form these sort of them and us viewpoints. And I think it's been interesting, hasn't it? Sad in a way, with the COVID-19, how as soon as there was a crisis, people, went back to national groups.
Yeah.
And then within the national groups, it went to regional groups. So I come from Cornwall, which is in the far southwest of England, a tourist area. So they've only had, I don't know, 5 incidents of COVID-19. Now that the government's beginning to open up, they're sort of saying, we don't want these people coming down from other parts of England. Cornwall has always had its own, they'll bring the virus here, keep them away. So, and then, we've got Scotland and Wales, etc. So what you've got is that people do, for better, for worse, this is a natural psychological phenomenon that we identify with certain groups, and they may be professional groups, they may be, regional groups, we've seen that, national groups, etc. I don't know what the answer is in terms of, because there's such a lot of emotional baggage that we all have that is associated with our group identities.
Yeah.
And that,
Thank
I think, interferes with the 3R
Looking at the time, and because there are still 4 who raised their hands, I would like to continue. Is that okay to you, Helen?
Yeah, that's fine
Yeah.
with me. Yeah.
There's Adrian Pilbeam. He was next. Adrian.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Helen, for a very interesting, stimulating talk. Nice to see you again.
Yeah,
I just want to make a comment, really, just to add to what you said towards the end about how to train people to better understand, or try to better understand, what's going on, and not to leap to conclusions. And that's, I mean, it's not rocket science. It's the age-old DIE approach: describe, interpret, evaluate, which is similar to the 3R
it is
tool, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is something that I always, whenever I've been doing training on as an awareness stage, to get people to reflect, to put that tool into operation, to give them examples, or when things come up during the session later in the day or the week, to actually say, okay, step back from that. You're jumping in and leaping to conclusions and all of that. So it's very, I mean, it's a simple tool in a way, but it's not easy to apply it systematically. But it's a very good, it's a very good discipline to try to do that.
Yeah, and exactly. And we just, I mean, the 3Rs is the same principle. We just felt DIE was an unfortunate acronym.
Yes, true. But there is another option, which is, I think, DAE, which is describe, analyze, and evaluate, to avoid the
yeah, exactly. I mean, we just relabeled it again because we found with companies, they found it very easy to say, oh, I'll use the 3R, but it was just a question of, but it's the same principle. I agree.
Same principle, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adrian. And I see Peter Franklin. He's already.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you for your talk, and nice to see you again in this strange virtual world of ours that we're getting used to. I just want to come back to this this incident about the inappropriate or perceived inappropriateness of the present being opened or not opened, or I can't even remember now what it was exactly. Were not these Chinese people the victims of mediocre intercultural training?
Absolutely, yeah.
And it just reminded me of how this kind of training it leads people astray, and what we need is a competence-oriented approach, which in this case should have been non-judgmentalness. Suspend judgment, wait and see, and collect more data to see whether this was inappropriate, deliberately offensive, or accidental, or whatever. In other words, train your people to reserve judgment rather than give people do's and don'ts, which are almost certain to fail.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree completely. And I think when I said that, it was in relation to, what can we tell people? And I think there is that danger that people think, oh, I've got to tell them what to do. Interestingly, perhaps, to go on with that particular example, they just said in passing, oh, it was a bit funny, they didn't open their presents. What I found more interesting was that the Chinese delegation had spent a lot of time every evening selecting the right present for the people for the next day, and were very concerned. They were very lovely, significant presents. And I find it interesting because one of the first incidents, they had got I forget what it was exactly, but a very large, very, attractive gift that they got, and they were showing it, and they had the photos taken. and the American counterparts had a had a small book like this and sort of just gave them the book. And I thought, oh gosh, will the delegation be offended, that they've only been given just a small gift when they had, the others had given a very large gift. And in the evening meeting afterwards, I thought it was really interesting because they said, we won a great victory today. We gained a lot of face because our present was so much better than their present. And that was not what I was expecting, to be honest. So, what can I say? All these things are kind of unpredictable. They questioned a number of times why the Americans were not giving them expensive gifts. They came to the conclusion, I don't think gifts mean the same thing to the Americans as to us. They came to that conclusion, but the interesting thing is they didn't go the next step and say, it actually doesn't really matter what gifts we give. They still spent every evening talking about, had they chosen the right gifts, what should they use the next day? And I think, I've got an article that's under review, but on, building relationships. And for them, the gift selection was a really important part of building relationships. Whereas for the Americans, that they didn't build relationships through giving gifts.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Now I see Sabine Spires.
Catherine Davis has been putting her hand up quite a bit physically, though you might want to.
Okay,
electronically.
Sabine Spires. Okay, and Stefan Meyer. Okay, disappeared maybe. So this is maybe the moment I can ask you something, Helen. In this case, from your first example, when the delegation went just for, going out shopping and so on, do you think that there should still be made approaches to a delegation after things failed and try to apply, such a 3R dialogue, for example, or invite them for it? Would you do things like that?
Yeah, obviously it's difficult, isn't it? Because, when you're as a researcher, you're meant to be like a fly on the wall, just collecting the data. I was working with somebody who was doing his PhD. It was not an action research project. So, we couldn't intervene in that sense. But yeah, if you're involved in joint partnerships, that's exactly, one would talk through. When I was managing eChina, there were all kinds of issues. And, this is one of the problems. When you first start off, you don't know what the differences and issues are going to be necessarily.
Yeah.
And then you come up against them, and a dilemma, and I don't know, I've not been able to resolve it, that our way or my way is very often, let's talk it through.
Yeah, but, and I heard a wonderful word today, confidence-oriented approach. And that could, create some confidence, at least invite those, leaders from the other group, and maybe first with not everybody, but try to reevaluate that.
Yeah. Certainly, yes, you need to talk through how you're doing things. I had to learn, when I was managing the project, despite knowing all about power distance and hierarchy and everything, I didn't think about its relevance to emails. So I had teams in Britain, and I had teams in China different, you know, and when I needed to send an email that was relevant to everybody, I just copied everybody in.
I mean,
and after a while, I got an email back from one of the Chinese project managers who said, Helen, when you do that, you really offend people.
Interesting.
Yeah, you really offend people because you've treated everybody as the same level of hierarchy.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And, you know, despite knowing it all, I hadn't thought about that application. And so I had to learn to sort of send multiple emails, probably the same wording, but just according to the hierarchy. So, you know, with that, you know, I think there are different ways. With that, I had somebody who could tell me where I was going wrong. And that's, I think, really helpful to have that, a kind of cultural mediator whom you can talk to, or somebody who will say, don't do it like that, or why don't you do this? Because you can't anticipate everything all in advance.
Yeah.
Auntie Catherine Davis has been raising her hand for a while. Catherine, why don't you speak up now?
It's strange enough. Please, Catherine.
Thank you. We've not met before, Helen, but thank you. I very much enjoyed your presentation. I work for a charity, a UK charity, not-for-profit charity, called the Experiment in International Living. And since we were founded 84 years ago, we've worked in intercultural understanding, and we do intercultural training. We hold a UK training contract for European Solidarity Corps volunteers coming into the UK. But our main work is to bring people together to around experiential learning, based on the philosophy that by living together, we learn to live together. And so we've run, we've also run programs, structured programs, to break down intolerance and racism. Not just here in the UK, but also involving other international students, young people mainly. But my question, which I'm very interested in, your description of the evaluation stage, because from our practitioner experience, that's exactly what we see every day in our work. And I'm particularly interested in how we might, or if you've come across examples or tools of how to move people more quickly from the evaluation into the adjustment. And we find this is the most difficult area to overcome, where, you know, helping people move from that evaluation into adjustment.
Yeah, this is where, personally, I think, although it needs a little bit of an adjustment, the work of Andy Malinsky I really like. He's done a book, Global Dexterity, and I've tried doing some of this with a student. I've got an article, I could try and send it to you afterwards, where I worked with students, because as you say, you know, there's the evaluation, but then, you know, there's that mutual adjustment. And so actually drawing on the ideas of Andy Malinsky, I said to them, okay, for their assignment, pick some kind of issue that's personally important to you, that you feel you are struggling to make those adjustments, right? And then they had certain tasks they had, you know, to sort of do. And so a number of them, interestingly, of different nationalities, chose greetings. And they said, you know, greetings are the first step for making friends. And if I don't get it right, you know, it's a problem. And what I'd asked them to do was to, you know, then work through those different stages. So choose something and then observe very carefully what was going wrong. And for many of, I mean, it was different for each of them, but for some it was, after we've said hi, or whatever, we don't know how to, what to do next, what to say next to just keep that conversation going. And so they used different, you know, so their thing was they had to then try something out, experiment with a new idea and then note what happened. And then do further experiments. It's a bit difficult to explain absolutely, but I talk about it in that. And they definitely made some, they felt they made a lot of progress, and particularly in building their confidence. So I think, and that other, we talked about the 3R, but the 4S, that little framework that's on our website, that's aimed at behavioral adjustment. And it's really all around that, you know, the person choosing what they want to focus on and then taking certain steps to work at it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Helen, for this very stimulating talk and the discussion. What came to my mind while listening to the discussion was I'm remembering my glitches when teaching international student groups in Frankfurt, that the role of English may play a very important role. So one of the questions I would ask, but that would be the topic of another session perhaps, what role does English as a lingua franca play in teaching intercultural competence? For example, in Britain or in Germany. I know that from my knowledge, in most German universities, lecturers, professors are usually completely unaware of this. And they still follow British, American conventions, which are more or less all linguistically based and very much following Brown and Levenson's concept of politeness conventions, which are British, of course. And you rightly put a question mark behind this. But as I said, we'll come back to the subject in a different context. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for this extremely stimulating session. And one of the ways we do this here is everybody waves his or her hand.
And also
anyway,
yourself.
Thank you.
So thank you all very much for so many joining and listening. That's and I see various, I can't see all the names, but it's lovely to see some names that I'm familiar with.
Before we finish, I would like to say what we are planning as a next webinar in this series. I hope you can see it now. This will be on the 1st of July. Professor Kühnen from the Jacobs University in Bremen and his colleague Nadine Binder. And as you can see from the title, it connects quite nicely with what Helen said about values and their relevance in intercultural research and in intercultural training. We very much appreciate this combination of the two because Uli Kühnen is the author of a book which I find extremely interesting in this context. It's written in German, and for those who don't speak German, I'll give it a translation. The title in German is Tierisch kultiviert. And if you translate that literally, it's beastly cultivated. And for that, you need to know that tierisch in German, which literally is beastly, has also a positive meaning, meaning excessively good. So tierisch cultivated, that's his approach. He is an empirical psychologist. And Nadine is a very experienced trainer. So the question comes up, and they hopefully will give us sufficient answers to that. How does the research of Uli Kühnen relate to the training mostly done by Nadine Binder? So looking forward to this one. Okay, thank you very much. Antje, will you wind it up now?
Yes. I'm also very happy that you have been here, Helen. Thank you very much. I hope the technical problems I had at the beginning were not transferred to you and you could really listen and have fun. And more than that, I wanted to say enlightened, but very well informed and inspired by Helen. Thank you, Helen.
Oh, thank you very much, everyone. And thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to sort of meet you all online. It's been great.
Okay. So bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye. So